I tell you what, Matt, I'm just hoping that some joker there at the Billawheeler Hotel doesn't ask them to put on Eagle Rock, because that could be absolute chaos here on live TV. But Nicholas Reese, I think Matt makes a very good point here. And I want to go back to these protests in Bondi. We saw those. How long is this going to go on? And let me ask you this as a mayor, because we had a big talk about this today at my other workplace about, do we need to say some places like Bondi Beach, like the Harbor Bridge, they're exclusion zones. You're not allowed to protest at these really iconic sites. Go have a protest somewhere else, but please stop hijacking our national symbols, which Bondi Beach is one of them, for your own causes.
Oh, I think you've got to be very careful in this space, James. I do think these protests cause enormous inconvenience, and I would like to see them better managed. But once you start, saying things like you can't protest in these iconic locations, I do worry that you're starting to get onto a slippery slope. So, it starts with Bondi Beach, and then you're going to say Sydney Harbour, and then you're going to say Bourke Street, Melbourne. Before you know it, you can't protest in this country anymore. So I think you've got to be really careful.
You're not allowed to go into Parliament House and start protesting. The politicians don't want to get interrupted. All right, you've got to get approval. You can go do it in the mall in the front of Parliament House. We've got to get approval for that. You can't just rock up in Parliament House and do it. Why should you be able to rock up at the Sydney Harbour Bridge? It's a major thoroughfare. Do you think people should be able to protest down the Bruce Highway? It's ridiculous.
I do take
reasonable restrictions here.
I do take Nick Reese's concerns, because while we talk about the concerns we have about becoming like Britain with all of the protests and the division and a lot worse they have there, I also worry about free speech a bit. But gents, I want to move on to, because there's so much else. A little while ago, former Prime Minister John Howard was on Sherry Markson's program. He slammed the Albanese government's net zero obsession. Here's a little of what he had to say.
I think the world is making a mistake by sort of going overboard about climate change. What I mean by that is that I'm not persuaded that the world will come to an end if we don't reduce carbon emissions in a radical way.
Yeah. So abandon net zero, the 2050
Well, that
targets.
means that I'm doubtful that net zero is worth the price we're paying for it.
Lord Mayor Nicholas Rees, let me ask this of you. Will the world come to an end if Australia doesn't meet its climate reduction targets?
Well, John Howard, he just keeps on giving for the Liberal Party, doesn't he? Not content having lost the 2007 federal election by refusing to commit Australia to the Kyoto target, he now wants the Liberals to lose the next election by walking away from the Paris climate emission targets. The fact is,
not sure.
a commitment to net zero
2007.
by 2050, a commitment to net zero by 2050 shows that you are a political party that believes in modernity, that you believe in progress and doing Australia's fair share to meeting our requirement to get to net zero so that we stop the environmental damage to our planet as a result of excessive fossil fuel and carbon emissions.
Nicholas Rees, I was working in Parliament House in 2007. I don't recall that election being about Kyoto. I think it was more about work choices and the it's time factor. But Matt, what do you reckon? How do you remember that?
Well, I don't think there's many politicians around that have a better sense of the thoughts of the Australian people than John Howard. I still think he absolutely does it, and the way he sums it up there. Is it worth it? That's ultimately the question that has to be asked here, when the rest of the world is not pursuing net zero. So it's not going to lead to the environmental benefits that Nick is trying to hoodwink into people into thinking that will happen. That won't happen if we act on our own. But of course, we'll be left with the enormous costs of reaching net zero. We know those costs now are very high, because the promises that were made to us when we signed up to net zero have not been delivered. A bit like the migration story I said before, the Prime Minister promised to cut our power bills. He promised that we'd have thousands of new jobs in new industries like hydrogen, and I'm here, right here in the centre of that in central Queensland, where we were promised a hydrogen hub. We promised we'd have these thousands of jobs, and we've just been deserted by a Labor Party that makes promises and then just leaves people to pick up the pieces. And so why should we have to pay these enormous costs in our country if it's not going to lead to any environmental benefits. This ridiculous idea that unless we hit net zero emissions in 2050 at a precise time, the world's going to end. We're not part of the modern world, apparently. I mean, give me a break.
I mean,
hang on, sorry. No.
People just want their lives made better, Nick. They can't afford their groceries. They're struggling to pay their mortgage. Their lives are much, much worse than they were just a few years ago. And you have these stupid slogans that mean nothing to anybody. Just do things that help people improve their lives. And the government is not doing that for us right now.